So after living in Warsaw and after living in Krakow, I've noticed a bunch of key differences between the two cities. I think they're both good, but for completely different reasons. So let's talk about it. Okay, so I think one of the major differences between the two cities is that there's just so much to do here in Warsaw, especially during the summertime. In Krakow, they have events too, but most of them are around the river area, but there's not a ton of things that are going on in the city in general. Here in Warsaw, it feels like every single day there's always multiple things going on. I think some people will argue that Krakow, even though it's smaller, a lot of the events feel a lot more cultural, and I can totally see that argument. I would have killed to grow up here as a teenager or a kid, because especially during the summer when everybody's out, 10-year-old kids are out with their friends biking around the city without supervision. I think it's a miracle that you have that level of safety in a big city like Warsaw, because in New York or Los Angeles or even a lot of the Western European capitals, those places are not safe anymore. So being able to leave your kids out without supervision and feel peace of them walking around, I think is like really, really amazing. Because Warsaw is so safe, it makes everything a lot more fun. You don't really have to worry about going out and getting drunk, having to drive home, or walking home and getting mugged on the street. Now, that was something that was in the back of my head all the time in Latin America. If I were to walk around in Rome or Paris right now, I would not feel safe at all. One of the most amazing things I think about living in Europe is how effortlessly they weave together green spaces and nature within the city. Unfortunately, a lot of the buildings look really new here in Warsaw because a lot of it got destroyed in the war. So that's why a lot of these new parks are so well designed. I think that's one of the advantages that Krakow has over Warsaw. That city was not really affected by the war. All of the landmarks, all of the buildings are all the originals. So that castle has been around, I believe, since like the 1300s. For me personally, I think Warsaw definitely is better in this regard just because of the sheer variety that you have. When I was in Krakow, it felt a lot more like it was a city built next to nature, whereas here in Warsaw, it feels more of a city with a lot of nature elements integrated into it. So there's quite a good nightlife scene here in Warsaw. One of my problems with it though is that, I'll be honest, the music in general sucks. It's kind of the same techno electronic pop that you hear in a lot of Eastern European countries. Because I'm from LA, I really love like hip hop or some Latin music because I stayed in Colombia, right? And sure, you have some Latin clubs here, but I'm gonna be honest, the Latin clubs here are a little trashy. Cubano is one of the most famous clubs here in Warsaw, and they also have one in Krakow. And that is one of the trashiest places that you can go to. If you look online, everybody says that Cubano is like a mess. They have this place called Sen here in Warsaw, which is like a higher end club, and apparently they play hip hop music, which is quite good. But I'm not really a club person, so that is not for me. Because it's a college town in Krakow, when you go out to these clubs, they're full of college students and people on the younger side. Once I turned 30, I realized that, man, I'm too old for this and I really felt out of place. Whereas here, because there's a lot more money, there are more scenes that are, I guess, like higher end. One of my favorite things to do in Europe is just to go to one of the national landmarks or a park and sit down, talk with your friends, and enjoy the view. You can do this in both of these cities, and I would argue that being next to the river in Krakow is actually a lot more beautiful than it is here. I think the cost of living right now is in an interesting spot. I think about 5 years ago, Poland was almost as cheap as some of the Southeast Asian countries and Latin America, believe it or not. But after the war, and because Poland has seen a lot of economic growth within the last few years, things have gotten quite expensive. Restaurants are pretty expensive now. I think it's slightly cheaper than the US and maybe like Germany or Austria, but it's getting there. Prices are climbing quite quickly, especially here in Warsaw. I think the biggest expense that you're gonna have here in Warsaw is the rent by far. I'm paying more than double than what I was paying in Krakow. Granted, my apartment is also 2 times the size, so it's also better. A quick search online shows that the average price for a 1-bedroom in the center in Krakow is around 2,500 to 3,500 zloty a month, whereas here in Warsaw, it's around 3,500 to 5,500 a month. But rent here is just more expensive in general. And groceries, it's all a part of like big chains, right? So Żabka, Carrefour, Auchan, I think the prices are around the same. But I have personally noticed a difference in the quality of meat. I think it was slightly better in Krakow than it is here. One of the big differences between the two cities, though, is just in the architecture. I think in Krakow, there's a city ordinance which says that you are not allowed to build a building over 6 stories, and I think it's to like protect the skyline. Here in Warsaw, you do not have that at all. So you have skyscrapers here, but you also have a lot of like traditional communist buildings and a lot of single-family homes. Even though those are not as common inside the city, they're more common in the suburbs. Because the architecture in Krakow is mostly original, it just has a completely different vibe. And because it was a city of kings, you feel it. That view next to the castle with the river, and then you have the Ferris wheel Hall of Form in the background is so beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful river skylines I've ever seen. If you're into the more traditional Polish architecture, I can see why people will like Krakow. One of the most beautiful things about Europe, I think, is just the amount of history here. So every time you see castles or these buildings, you know that they are hundreds of years old. Because these buildings are new, it takes away a little bit from, I guess, the history side of it. But I can't deny that the beauty of the architecture is amazing here. There's nothing like being in a European capital city, especially during the summer. So when deciding which city is best for you, it can be a little tricky because there are a lot of factors to consider. But one thing that isn't up for debate is having great luggage, which is why I'm excited to talk about my favorite luggage brand, Level 8. I finally received the Gibraltar aluminum carry-on, which is their top of the line luggage, and my god, this luggage is so sexy. Look how nice it looks. Level 8 has a ton of amazing options with beautiful designs and a variety of colors. I also have the free loop carry-on luggage in green. I personally love the old school vintage look and thought it looked way different than any other luggage I've ever seen before. All products come with a lifetime warranty, so you never have to worry if the luggage breaks. They also offer free shipping to US, Canada, and Europe. If you guys are interested in upping your luggage game, use code whereswes at checkout for an additional 10% off. As far as dating goes, I don't have too much experience, to be honest, because a lot of the people that I met either watch my channel or were living in my building when I was living in Krakow. From what my friends tell me, Krakow seems to be a better place if you are younger, like in the college scene. You don't need a lot to, I guess, be more attractive. In a big city, there's just a lot of money here and the competition is a lot more fierce, both with men and for women. So I think from that aspect, dating can be a lot more difficult here. People in big cities are generally a lot more promiscuous and relationships are easier to throw away. If you grew up in a smaller town, everybody kind of knows each other. People value relationships a lot more because there's also kind of a societal pressure to stay together. And I've seen this phenomenon all over the world. People from smaller cities generally value relationship a lot more than people from big cities. And I think because it is quite lonely here in Warsaw, I do find it difficult to meet people. A lot of people say that they've met their significant others through Tinder, but I think it's a lot different now than it was back in the days. If I'm being honest, I think that Warsaw feels pretty lonely. It is a city very similar to a lot of East Asian cities where everybody kind of minds their own business and stays to themselves. But a part of me does miss the warmness of places like Latin America, where you can actually say hi to people on the street and people don't look at you like you're retard. And I've only been here for a few months, so maybe I just haven't had enough time to really meet people. Here in Warsaw, I'm living in a normal apartment. Krakow, I was living in a co-living area, so I had friends to hang out with all of the time. If I'm being honest, most of my expat friends here, they only hang out with other expats. They may have a local girlfriend, whether they're Polish or Ukrainian, but if they have local friends, they're usually through their significant other. I don't know how easy it is to integrate as a foreigner, to be honest. I have a different experience because I have a YouTube channel, right? So I meet a ton of people from there. Poland in general is a pretty closed country to outsiders. And I think the only way that you can break through that is if you speak the language. And because Polish, in my opinion, is probably the hardest language in the world. That's one of the main reasons why it's very difficult for expats to integrate here. Now, one of the benefits is that all the expats here, we kind of know each other. So once you get introduced to one group and you network with a bunch of people, it's easy to meet other people. And you can also go to, like, I guess, expat meetups so you can meet other foreigners. And I actually think that foreigners get treated better in Krakow than they do in Warsaw, because Krakow is a more tourist city, so they're used to seeing all those international people. And because it's also a college town, they have a lot of international students that are studying there as well. So I think because of that environment, it's a lot easier to meet people, especially because it's a small town. Whereas in a big city, I think in general, it's pretty hard to meet people. The locals, they have friends that they've been friends with since they were kids. And it's very hard to break into that, right? Unless you have a social media presence or you kind of have an in somewhere. So one of the big differences here is the differences in just the vibes of the city. There's a lot of first generation mixed kids from other cultures who have moved here to Warsaw, but Krakow, it's a tourist town and a college town in one. So you're gonna get a lot of international people, but the locals kind of treat you like a tourist. Warsaw, it's this beautiful mix of both a big city and a small city, but the mentality of the people here are still big city. People from big cities are a lot more cosmopolitan. They've been exposed to a lot more. So they are a lot more liberal and accepting of other races, of LGBT, as compared to some of the smaller cities. I think Krakow is accepting of international people because they receive so many tourists, but it's not that common to see international people living there. So I still feel like it's a little more conservative. Poland in general is still quite a conservative country, but you're going to see that the most of the liberal people are going to be here in Warsaw. And people in big cities also have just like a different way of viewing life. Warsaw is a city of opportunity, which means that a lot of the relationships you have here are transactional to a certain extent. Whereas when I was in Krakow, I feel like the relationships and the people that I met there were a lot more real. A lot of people say that here in Warsaw, the people are not super nice or welcoming. I actually disagree with that. I think people here are actually more polite than the people in Krakow. And I think it's because in Krakow, they just automatically assume you're a tourist if you're a foreigner. So they're not going to really take the time to like go out of their way, I guess, to talk with you. Here in Warsaw, I feel like the people are a lot more polite. But because it's a big city, you can know a lot of people, but it's quite difficult to establish a very profound relationship. People from other cities see that people from Warsaw are like snobby or they think they're better than everybody else. And I totally see it. But that's not unique to here. It's just when people are in big cities, you usually have a lot more money. You have a lot more opportunity. You come from more privileged backgrounds. In Krakow, it does feel more like a small town. And you have the main area in the old town where everybody goes. And that's pretty much where everything is happening, to be honest. But it does get old quite quickly. Here in Warsaw, the energy is very vibrant. It's alive. There's a lot of things to do. There's a lot of things to see. So I think that just makes Warsaw a lot more interesting. I've been here for 3 months and I try to go out every day, either for a walk or a bike ride or a boat ride. And I'm trying to explore as much of the city as possible. I find like I'm always discovering something new here in Warsaw. There are just so many things to see. Whereas in Krakow, even as a tourist, you can pretty much see all the important stuff in like a day and a half. And after living there for a year and a half, I was just so familiar with the city. It didn't feel like there was anything new, even though it was extremely beautiful and I really enjoyed my time there. I can see why people find it boring. I did enjoy the vibe of Krakow a lot more because it was a lot more slow paced and chill. I think it depends on what point you are in your life that determines whether you'll like Warsaw or Krakow a lot more. I do find that the public transportation in Warsaw is very, very impressive because you have so many different options. You have tram, you have bus, you have the metro, you have scooters, you have bikes. In Krakow, because it's a smaller city, you have the Bolt scooters during the summer, but they don't have the bike rental system that they have here in Warsaw. It's called Veturio or something like that. In Krakow, you don't have any metro, even though I think they're working on it right now. But it's a pretty small city and you can get around mainly by tram and bus. I like the layout of both cities for different reasons. I think the layout in Warsaw is really interesting because you have a bunch of like really iconic areas all right next to each other. So there's always something new to see and you can walk through the whole entire city. But I also really like the central design of Krakow because everything is pretty much centered around the old town. So let's talk about weather for a little bit. Weather here in Warsaw is interesting because it's not as humid as Krakow and it's very windy. I'm not gonna lie. Because there's a lot of construction going on in the city. I don't know if it's just because of the construction, but I think that has a lot to do with it. This city is just so dusty, and because it's so windy, you just feel like all this pollutants constantly going on your skin all the time. And during the winters, I don't think that Warsaw really gets a lot of snow either, which is unfortunate because snow here is one of the things that actually makes winter great. If you have a winter without snow, it's like one of the most depressing things ever. Here in Warsaw, I think that during the winter, it's a little more rainy and a little more gray, whereas in Krakow, we got proper snow. And I like cold weather, I'm not gonna lie. So in this regard, I actually think Krakow is slightly better. One of the things I'm still getting used to here though is the incredible range in which the sun is up. So in the peak of summer, on the solstice, June 21st, I swear that the sun's not fully gone until pretty much 11 p.m. and it's up again at like 3 a.m. Whereas during the winter, it's like the complete opposite. The sun comes up super late, maybe around like 9 a.m. and it sets before 3 p.m. So you have like two extremes. This is something that I'm still trying to get used to. I don't know, it's quite difficult. I'm gonna be honest, in Poland in general, the shopping here is quite bad. It's always funny to me when I see the Polish girls in like the dress with the sneakers or Polish guys wearing all these clothes in patterns that don't match each other at all. I know a lot of Polish girls have an issue with how the Polish men dress here, but I think it's because there's just not really a lot of good options. Here in Warsaw, there are more international brands because it's the capital city, but the selection honestly is not as good as a place like Spain or Italy or London. Now, when it comes to location, I think Krakow is well positioned relative to all of Europe because it's in the south of Poland. And if you're traveling to a lot of other destinations in Europe, that's actually one of the best places to be. Warsaw is right in the middle of the country. So if you're traveling to a lot of places in Poland, this is a more strategic location. The restaurant scene is definitely much better here in Warsaw. Krakow, there's a lot of Viet restaurants, a lot of Indian restaurants. Here in Warsaw, you have everything. You have Italian, you have Korean, you have Japanese. It's the best of the best. A problem that I did notice in Krakow though, is that because it's such a small city, during the summer, like peak tourist season, all of the restaurants are full and you need a reservation. And even some of the smaller, not so fancy restaurants, that means that the city is experiencing a lot of demand of people coming through and they don't have the supply quite to meet it yet. But it's kind of annoying if you live in that city and you want to go out and eat with your friends. Maybe the options are limited during certain times of the year. My personal experience is very different in these two cities. I'm very emotionally attached to Krakow because that was my first city. I have so many friends that are still live there. That city just kind of feels more like home to me. There was not a lot of opportunities for growth, and I think that was the biggest reason why I had to move. I saw that as my channel was growing, if I really wanted to progress my career, I had to eventually move to the big city here in Warsaw. One of the benefits of living in a big city is that because there's so many people here, it makes it a lot easier to find people to transact with and to develop these transactional relationships. And I guess to a certain extent, all relationships are some form of value exchange. So I don't necessarily really have a problem with that. I think Warsaw has a lot to offer as a city. I think it's really beautiful. I think there's a lot of opportunity here and it's kind of in the perfect situation right now. It's developing, but it's not too developed. It's getting more expensive, but it's still not too expensive. The population is still quite small. It doesn't feel overcrowded yet. And there's a lot of exciting possibilities coming in the future in this city because Poland is such a growing economy. So I personally have to be here right now at this point in my life for my career and for a bunch of other reasons. But if I had to pick long term, I probably would prefer to live in Krakow than I do in Warsaw. I don't know. I think things change as you get older based on the relationship that you have. If you have a family, there's just a lot of factors that go into it. But Warsaw, out of many of the big cities that I've seen in the world, is actually one of the best. Even though I may not want to settle down long term in Warsaw, I think the Warsaw is definitely better, at least for me. I think rivalries like this are stupid. People always want to find a reason to fight over stuff, but I think both cities are great in their own way. What do you guys think? Leave your thoughts down below. I highly recommend you guys watch this video next, and I will see you on the next one.